Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek, and welcome to Day 8 of my 31 Days of Halloween Reviews. So as promised today, we are returning to a graphic novel, and specifically The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. This is a newer title, and it's one that I like a lot actually. I do recommend it, but with some caveats, so stay tuned to hear those, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on them. But first, I'd just like to talk about Sabrina. First, the Teenage Witch. She is a character who I've long enjoyed and followed from the Archie comics. She's an older character who was introduced shortly, well not shortly, but she was introduced pretty close to the heyday of Archie comics way back when. Before us here on the screen, I have, just as a setup, I've got, the Sabrina, we're going to look at that in a second, check out the great art, but I have a DVD collection I have of the old cartoon. And this has the complete series, or just season one? I think it's complete series actually. I've been watching it some off and on. It's really great though. It's a walk down memory lane. I of course wasn't alive for the first airing of this cartoon, but I do remember occasionally I hear millennials, or at least on the older side, millennials on the older side, talking about how, oh, I remember Blockbuster, oh, those were the days. Like, that is not long ago at all. Now, granted, I'm only 38, so I'm hardly, much older people who remember things far back than I do, but I do remember the point when VCRs were such a novel technology that we didn't own one, and we would go as a special treat every now and then to a electronics store and rent a VCR for the weekend, believe it or not. So we would have it for the weekend, and my sister and I would get to go and rent a couple of videos from their little wall of videos, and we had a number of titles we would always rent because, they're your favorites. You only get to watch them when you have that special treat. So it was the animated Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, Disney's Condor Man was another favorite of mine, but Sabrina the Teenage Witch was a big favorite of mine as well, because I've always been drawn to these characters in this universe. Sabrina does take place within the Archie's universe, but she's also within her own little corner of it. Depending on the story, she's either in Greendale, which is a adjacent city to Riverdale, or sometimes the stories have just placed her in Riverdale as well, depending on what incarnation you get. But there are certain staples of her character. She lives with her two aunts, Zelda and Hilda. Her love interest, her boyfriend, or at least the boy she wants to be her boyfriend, depending on the story, is Harvey. She has a pet cat, Salem, who is her familiar, and he's a great character in all of the incarnations I've seen him. And she can cross over with the Archie characters. I remember in one of the cartoons specifically, there's a great episode where Jughead comes over, because the Archie's cartoon was, of course, very popular, and this was a spin-off from that in the 60s there. So Sabrina is like the Archies in that she embodies an archetype of that teenager struggling. She's different. She's trying to fit in, but she's trying to embrace who she is individually as well, and who she is specifically. And what makes her different is that she's a witch. And depending on the story, that can come with all kinds of great problems and troubles. I mean, this is the problems of her family and how to deal with a family that she knows is so different than everybody else. What do you do when your friends come over, and the real life correlation to that is maybe your own parents are deeply religious, more so than the average person, and have some differences about them or whatever. It could be a racial thing, or anything really, ethnicity of any kind of sort, just culturally different too. So her story speaks to a lot of different real life struggles and everything like that, and she can be done very innocently and child-friendly and just pure fun like that. This is her recent appearance in the mainline Archie comic reboot. She appeared in a Jughead title, and I'm hoping that she'll get her own title within the main Archie continuity. There, of course, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a still running title, so I have to say something about the Melissa Joan Hart series, because that was a great show. So pure 90s. If those 90s shows bother you, then don't even bother checking it out. But even ran past the 90s too, I think. Anyway, great show. Sabrina, Melissa Joan Hart's another icon from my childhood, teen heartthrob and such. But let's go ahead and talk about this title and what it does differently with the characters. This is a standalone continuity. It does not exist in any of the other Archie communities. It's its own thing, like Archie with Afterlife with Archie. And Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa wrote this. He's the same author from Afterlife with Archie. And apparently after the overwhelming success of Afterlife with Archie, he pitched this idea, and everybody liked it, and he rolled with it. So this is a very adult comic book, not for children by any means. Definitely a horror comic book. The way Sakasa describes it in the foreword is that if Afterlife with Archie was more about horror related to the body, more Lovecraftian and the zombies and the undead coming back and all that kind of stuff. Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a little more psychological. So it's kind of the difference going from Lovecraft to Poe is one way to explain it. Not that there aren't crossovers and some exceptions here and there, but great tale. Robert Hack does the art for this one, and he's a new artist. He's not the same one that worked on Afterlife with Archie. He did the art as well as the coloring. So we're going to talk about that in a second as well. But first, to clear out the genre, what genre is this book? It very much harkens back to it's a gothic tale, and it harkens back to those great gothic novels with, in fact, a lot of the variant covers for The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the various issues, have been referencing those wonderfully composed gothic novel covers where you have the mysterious house on the hill or something in the distance, and the woman is running away from it in the foreground, and she's either the innocent maiden of the story or the femme fatale of the tale, either one. So it's definitely a gothic story. It's set in the 60s, which I think is a great move because it sets it apart from modern times, and you can do more things that you couldn't do in a modern day setting with all of the technology we have and everything's interconnected. There's more room for magic to breathe in the 60s, I think, and it reminds me a lot of the Dark Shadows series, the old Dark Shadows series, specifically the first couple seasons when it was really more purely a gothic kind of New England tale. And that's what this one is, set in New England, of course, where Sabrina should be set. Go ahead and show you some of the art as we talk about it, because I want to mention it, flip through it a bit. The art, it took a little getting used to for me, honestly. You can take a look at it and you can see that Robert Hack is a very talented artist. He's not like I don't want to mention any names, alienate anyone who might like these artists I don't like. But you know how some artists are just so sort of expressionist and so, experimental, and it just doesn't work for you. At least for me, it doesn't. Robert Hack's not like that. But it still took me some getting used to for a couple of reasons, because he's capable of drawing characters that are so beautiful and gorgeous, and not just like a female who's gorgeous, but just the art itself is so wonderfully rendered, and the figures and everything like that, men and women and everybody. So he's capable of that, but he doesn't always stick to it. Quite often you'll see a character in one panel look lovely and beautiful and even idealized to a certain degree, and then in the next panel, the same character looks a little wolf. It just almost like he didn't take time on the panel, and it was just kind of quickly drawn. And you'll see younger people also all of a sudden like add 10 years for in the next panel for a second. I don't really like that kind of art, but I became sold on the art as I went through the story, because I realized I think that's on purpose. And I think that's on purpose because this story about these witches, the folklore that it draws on, is about a lifestyle that is very attractive on the surface, but there's a heavily dark thing brooding underneath it, and a not so lovely thing underneath it. And I think the art is actually reflecting that. It puts me in mind of one of my favorite film noir films called Kiss Me Deadly, which was a later film noir film. Look that up sometime, even just to watch clips on YouTube, and you'll see how that director, I'm forgetting the director's name right now, but it's a spy-ish thriller, with your Mike Hammer is the hard-boiled detective that they brought in for that film. So it's one of the films out of his stories and series. But the director cast lovely people and gorgeous people in the movie, but the cinematography is such that there's also something off about them, and it's a great theme because there's something off about the plot, not the plot the way it's constructed, but the things that are happening in that story. You're supposed to see how there's not something so pretty underneath the surface of that story, and I think that's also what's at play here with Sabrina. And the fact that he colored it as well is brilliant. I like that when artists are capable and have the time to color their own artwork. It tends to be a different kind of vision for that. So that was very good. There are two dangers with this kind of story. One is that, so she, in some of the more innocent Sabrina stories, she's a witch, but it doesn't really, it's an innocent kind of just playful witch lore that she's in. It's not really it's nothing really truly dangerous about it. But in Sabrina the Chilling Adventures, no, her family are witches, a coven of witches. They worship Satan, and they, it's just all full out with that. So there's a pitfall there, a couple of dangers with that for readers. I think this book steps around it pretty delicately, but it's still a delicate dance. The one danger is that, you're talking about Satanism, and you're actually having your main characters that you're following actually worshiping Satan, and and they're cannibals in this and everything. And that's so the witches eat people and all this kind of witch folklore stuff. The one danger is that you're going to alienate, or at least make some people feel uncomfortable who are more mainstream. Whether you're like me, I happen to be Catholic, so that's, the second you start to mention that a little bit of stuff, it's a little uncomfortable, with your, the things that. But even, I don't even think you have to be religious. You're just such a mainstream culture that a lot of people, religious or not, are going to feel a little uncomfortable with that kind of talk. But the story the story does really well with it. It doesn't glorify it, but it doesn't necessarily... It even makes it relatable, to be honest. I'll say more about that in a second. The second pitfall that could possibly fall into, but I don't think this story does, is that anytime you have a story with witches and you're going to draw on the folklore of witchcraft, and they're worshiping Satan, and they have the coven has their little sabbats, and they sign their name in the devil's book and all these kinds of things, you conflate the mythology, like the folklore of witchcraft, with actual real pagan religions that are out there, like Wicca and stuff like that. And I have friends who are Wiccan, for example, and different variations of it. And that's an actual religion that's nature-based, and that's not Satan worship or anything like that, So the second pitfall is to alienate people who are one of those religions, or know people who are, and it's a problem. I mean, not really so much where I live, but I've heard of stories where you've got women who practice Wicca in somewhere in the Bible Belt of the country, or out in Midwest or whatever, and that kind of thing is used against them in, say, custody battles, and divorce trials and stuff like that, or are they're prevented from adopting and stuff like that. So it's two pitfalls there a story like this could fall into. I think he sidesteps it very delicately, and I can't even really tell you specifically how he does, but he just does with the aspects of the story. I mean, he's got, she's on her 16th birthday. She's supposed to be baptized into the coven, and some pretty wild and crazy, just, man, ritualistic stuff is going down, but it doesn't all truly transpire in the same way. I don't know. I don't want to give it away. So that's all I'll say about that. But the story's great. It begins with a wonderful setup with her father and how she was born, and how the circumstances surrounding that, how she came to live with her two aunts, and it sets that up really well. And then it jumps into the current day setting. It sets you into where she's a teenager, they're in Greendale, and now the story's going to move along. And this is my one critique of the story. The next thing it introduces the antagonist, the big bad guy, the villain of the story, who's a great villain. I'll talk about her in a second. But it introduces her, and then it has to go back in time again and retell some of the same stuff it just told, in order to bring her into the origin and get her going, and her motivations going. And then once she's fully developed, and once everybody's on the same page, then the story can move forward from there. And I think that's a little bit of a mistake. I know it probably would have been difficult and a lot to work in, but I think just from a storytelling perspective, that it would have had a greater symmetry to work all of that exposition in to the backstory, get everybody, the seeds, everything planted, and then as you move forward, bring everybody up to speed with the hero and the villain and everything like that. So I think that probably would have been the better way to go. It's still hardly a real issue, a real problem with the story. It's entertaining to read, and it's not going to turn you off of this tale at all by any means. So let's talk about the villain. The villain is a character by the name of Madam Satan. And this edition of Volume 1 that I have actually includes one of the original Madam Satan stories way back in the day, the 40s, I think, in Pep Comics. So originally, comic books, if you don't know, they weren't all just superhero comic books and one character, a story carried through one title and stuff like that. They were very much similar to the Pulp Fiction novels, to the Pulp Fiction magazines that had different genres of stories in them. And you would have, say, an adventure story, a horror story, and stuff like that, different stories. So Madam Satan, there's a little blurb about it, and she appeared in Pep Comics 17 there, or 16, 1941 there, yeah. So this was her character, and she was very much a seductress, kind of the traditional story about the mysterious femme fatale who is a supernatural, is a demon. Her story, I think, was that she killed the parents of her fiance who disapproved of her and ended up having to be the consort of Satan for punishment, and has to carry out this crime and lure men into her seductive grasp and steal their soul and stuff like that. So it's a great addition to the volume to include this original story. That was fun. And then her character comes back in this tale, is reimagined a little bit as Madam Satan, and she's called Madam Satan throughout. So that's a great addition to this story, bringing her into the Sabrina universe. I don't think that's ever been done. I don't remember it being done anyway in another incarnation. She's posing as the school teacher there. So great stuff there. I think the real allure of it for me is just the human story of Sabrina. She's a young girl who's got to decide whether she wants to accept her family's religion or not. And her family wants her to do one thing, and she has a conscience that's conflicted, and she wants to be this other thing. She has her own identity growing with her friends and the people at school. And she's really trying to figure out who she is amidst all of this. Is she religious at all? What kind of life does she want before her? What kind of future does she want? And these are very human struggles, especially for teenagers and college-age people. So it's very human, even though she's trying to decide whether to go write her name in Satan's book and all that stuff. I saw correlations to it, honestly, in my own confirmation process into the Catholic Church, for example. So no matter what the content of it is, he's treating it in a way that's easily relatable to anybody, to any reader. So it's a great title. Just some of the things that I like about it. We could go on and on, but let me know what you think if you're reading this one. What do you think? How does it compare to Afterlife with Archie, or at least my review of Afterlife with Archie and your idea of that comic? Which one do you seem to like a little better? This one, I think this one's got my interest a little bit more because I like this. I just tend to gravitate towards the psychological stuff. So a great Halloween read too, definitely. If you like horror and you like sort of witch stuff and psychological and period piece. This is set in the 60s, and it's really solidly set in the 60s with the authors and the movies they talk about and stuff. So great piece. I recommend it if all of that sounds okay for you. Tune in tomorrow for another graphic novel. We're going to go back to something a little more traditional, but still very much Halloween related. And we'll keep getting a variety of this content throughout the month. So we still have a long ways to go. Thanks for watching. Please share, like, subscribe, all of that. Click on the button at the end there if you're interested in my book, Heroic Inspirations. And tune in tomorrow at 5 or 6-ish whenever I decide to pop this one up online there. And until tomorrow, keep reading and digging deeper into the superhero and Halloween-related stories you like best. Thanks for watching.